The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the banks of the Nile, where the screams of Hebrew mothers pierced the air. Their newborn sons, condemned by Pharaoh's decree, were being torn from their arms and cast into the crocodile-infested waters. This was Egypt at its darkest hour. A mighty empire built on the backs of slaves, where the Israelites had lived in bondage for over 400 years. In those days, Egypt was the world's superpower. Its pyramids stretched toward the heavens, its armies were unmatched, and its pharaohs were worshipped as gods. The palace walls told stories of conquest and glory, painted in vibrant colors that belied the suffering beyond its gates. In these same halls, princes and princesses walked in golden sandals, while Hebrew slaves toiled under the burning sun, their backs scarred by Egyptian whips. But amidst this darkness, a story of hope was about to unfold. A story that would shake the very foundations of Egypt and echo through the centuries. It began with a mother's desperate act of love, placing her infant son in a basket of reeds, entrusting him to the very river that had claimed so many innocent lives. The greatest escape in human history was about to begin. Over 2 million slaves would eventually flee from one of the ancient world's most heavily fortified nations. The odds were impossible, a trapped people against the might of Egypt, with its chariots, trained soldiers, and defensive walls that had never been breached. The scale of this exodus was unprecedented. Imagine the entire population of a modern city suddenly moving on foot through hostile territory. Men, women, children, elderly, carrying whatever possessions they could manage, driving their livestock before them. The logistics alone were staggering. Feeding 2 million people in the desert, maintaining order, finding water in the wasteland. This wasn't just a mass migration. It was a revolution that would transform a nation of slaves into a people destined to change the world. But first, they needed a leader. Someone who could stand before Pharaoh himself and demand freedom. Enter Moses, a man who would witness more miracles than any other figure in the Old Testament. The signs and wonders that followed him would become legendary. Rods transforming into serpents, water turning to blood, the parting of the sea itself. But perhaps the greatest miracle was Moses himself, a Hebrew child raised as an Egyptian prince who would eventually choose to suffer with his own people rather than enjoy the pleasures of the palace. His story would combine elements that seemed impossible: royalty and slavery, power and humility, judgment and mercy. The miracles he performed would demonstrate God's power over nature itself. Plagues that brought the mightiest empire to its knees, water flowing from solid rock, bread falling from heaven. Yet behind these spectacular displays lay a deeper story. One of personal transformation, of a man wrestling with destiny, of leadership forged in the furnace of conflict and crisis. This is where our story truly begins. The marble halls of Pharaoh's palace echoed with the soft footsteps of a young prince, not of Egyptian blood, but a Hebrew child who fate had placed in the heart of power itself. Moses, pulled from the waters of the Nile by Pharaoh's own daughter, grew up in a world of stark contrasts. Each morning, as servants dressed him in the finest Egyptian linens, he could see from his chamber windows the Hebrew slaves laboring under the scorching sun. Their distant cries carried on the wind, a haunting reminder of his true heritage. In the palace, he learned the art of warfare, the secrets of Egyptian magic, and the delicate dance of court politics. Yet something deeper stirred within him, an unshakable connection to those who suffered beyond the palace walls. The young prince excelled in everything he touched. Historical records suggest he led successful military campaigns, managed vast construction projects, and earned the respect of Egypt's elite. But beneath his confident exterior, a storm was brewing. Every time he sat at banquets, watching nobles feast while his people starved, the discord in his soul grew stronger. One detail often overlooked was Moses' relationship with his adoptive mother, Pharaoh's daughter. She had defied her father's decree to save him, and in doing so planted the seeds of rebellion in the future liberator's heart. Though raised to worship Egypt's gods, Moses never fully embraced their rituals. Perhaps it was the whispered prayers of his birth mother, his nurse by divine arrangement, that kept him connected to the God of his ancestors. As Moses approached his 40th year, the tension between his two worlds reached a breaking point. His education had given him everything: military strategy, leadership skills, knowledge of Egyptian weaknesses. Exactly what would be needed to lead an exodus. But first, he would have to choose. Remain a prince of Egypt, or become a servant of the living God. The palace that had been his home for 4 decades was about to become his prison. And the decision he would make would alter not just his own destiny, but the fate of nations. The turning point came on a scorching afternoon when the crack of a whip split the air. Moses, now in his prime at 40 years old, witnessed an Egyptian overseer mercilessly beating a Hebrew slave. The scene before him crystallized everything he had wrestled with for years: the injustice, the cruelty, the stark division between his 2 worlds. Time seemed to slow as Moses glanced around. The golden palace loomed behind him, offering safety and privilege. Before him, his fellow Hebrew bled into the desert sand. In that moment, 40 years of inner conflict exploded into action. His trained warriors' hands moved with deadly precision. When the dust settled, the overseer lay dead, hastily buried in the desert sand. But secrets in Egypt had a way of surfacing. Within hours, whispers of the prince's deeds spread through the palace corridors. The same court that had once embraced him now turned hostile. Pharaoh's guard, once his protectors, became his hunters. The man who had commanded armies now found himself a fugitive, fleeing into the unforgiving desert. The journey that followed tested every fiber of his being. The prince who had slept on Egyptian cotton now lay on cold desert rocks. Hands that had held golden scepters now grasped a shepherd's staff. He crossed burning sands, evaded search parties, and finally collapsed, exhausted, by a well in Midian. There, among the shepherds of Midian, Moses found an unexpected sanctuary. The priest Jethro offered him not just shelter, but a new life, and the hand of his daughter Zipporah in marriage. Yet even as he settled into the quiet life of a shepherd, the weight of his people's suffering haunted his dreams. For 40 years he would walk the wilderness paths, leading sheep instead of armies. Each sunset painted the desert mountains in gold, reminding him of the palace he'd left behind. But in this harsh landscape, far from Egyptian luxury, Moses was being forged into something new. Not a prince of Egypt, but a servant of God. Little did he know that his greatest challenge still lay ahead, waiting in the form of a bush that would burn but not be consumed. Dawn broke over Mount Horeb as Moses led his flock through familiar paths. For 40 years this had been his routine, a far cry from the grand halls of Egypt. But this morning would be different. Through the morning mist, he spotted something extraordinary. A bush engulfed in flames, yet mysteriously unconsumed. The sight drew him closer, his weathered shepherd's feet stepping carefully over sacred ground. Then came the voice, not the soft whisper of wind through leaves, but a command that shook him to his core. Remove your sandals, for the place where you stand is holy ground. In that moment, the shepherd of Midian encountered the God of his ancestors. The conversation that followed would change the course of history. The divine commission was clear: return to Egypt, confront Pharaoh, and lead the Israelites to freedom. But Moses, no longer the confident prince, raised 5 objections that revealed his transformed heart. "Who am I?" came his first response, a striking contrast to the proud prince who once walked Egypt's halls. Then, "What if they ask your name?" His third objection revealed deeper doubts. "They won't believe me." The fourth exposed his insecurity. "I am not eloquent." Finally, in desperation, "Please send someone else." Each objection was met with divine assurance. A staff that turned to serpent, a hand that became leprous and was restored, the promise of Aaron's support as spokesman. Yet perhaps most powerful was the revelation of God's name. "I am who I am," a declaration that would echo through the ages. The burning bush faded, but its impact blazed in Moses' heart. The shepherd gathered his few possessions, bid farewell to his father-in-law Jethro, and with his wife and sons began the journey back to Egypt. The man who fled as a murderer would return as a liberator. As he walked toward Egypt, each step carried the weight of divine purpose. The palace where he once lived as prince would now become the battleground, where he would confront Pharaoh not with sword and spear, but with signs and wonders from the God of his fathers. The desert wind swept across the camp of Israel, carrying whispers of change. Moses, now 120 years old, stood at his tent's entrance, his eyes still sharp, his strength undiminished despite his age. Yet he knew these were his final days. The man who had shaped a nation from slaves into warriors now faced his own mortality. In these last precious moments, every interaction carried profound weight. Children who once feared his presence now gathered around him, drinking in his words like water in the desert. The elders who had challenged him countless times now sat silent, recognizing the impending loss of their greatest leader. Joshua, his chosen successor, shadowed him closely, absorbing every gesture, every decision, every word of wisdom. The young warrior who had once led battles under Moses' command now prepared to shoulder the mantle of leadership. Their conversations, once focused on strategies and battles, now turned to deeper matters. The weight of leading God's people, the importance of remembering their deliverance, the challenge of maintaining faith in times of doubt. The camp buzzed with an unusual tension. Some refused to believe the rumors of Moses' impending departure. How could the man who had brought water from rock, who had spoken with God face to face, who had led them through impossible odds, be preparing to leave them? The same people who had rebelled against him now couldn't imagine life without his guidance. Moses spent these days completing his final tasks. He wrote down the law, ensuring every word was preserved for future generations. His voice, still strong, delivered his last sermons, not with the thundering authority of Sinai, but with the tender concern of a father saying goodbye to his children. He blessed each tribe individually, his words painting pictures of their unique destinies. But perhaps most poignant were his private moments. In his tent, alone with his thoughts, he would touch the staff that had parted the Red Sea, remembering the incredible journey from prince to shepherd to liberator. He thought of Miriam, his sister, who had watched over his basket in the Nile, now resting in a desert grave. Of Aaron, his brother and voice, who had already gone to his rest on Mount Hor. The hardest part was knowing he would never set foot in the Promised Land. From his tent, he could see the Jordan River glinting in the distance, marking the boundary he would never cross. Yet there was no bitterness in his acceptance of God's decree. His last days were marked not by regret, but by a deep peace, the peace of a man who had fulfilled his divine purpose. The stage was set for his final ascent. But first, there would be one more crisis that would seal his fate forever. The crisis erupted like a sudden sandstorm in the desert of Zin. The people's throats were parched, their water skins empty, and their patience exhausted. The familiar cry rose again, "Why have you brought us to this wilderness to die?" The same complaint Moses had heard for 40 years now reached a fever pitch at Meribah Kadesh. Moses and Aaron fled to the tent of meeting, falling on their faces before the Lord. The divine instruction came clear and simple. Take the staff, speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. A test of faith wrapped in a simple command. But something was different this time. Decades of rebellion had taken their toll. Moses, the man once praised for his unmatched humility, rose with anger burning in his eyes. Before him stood the same people who had witnessed countless miracles. The parting of the sea, bread from heaven, water from rock, yet still they doubted. The crowd gathered around the massive rock formation, their angry murmurs filling the air. Moses gripped the staff, the same staff that had turned to a serpent before Pharaoh, that had split the Red Sea. But instead of speaking to the rock as commanded, 40 years of frustrated leadership erupted in a moment of fateful disobedience. "Listen, you rebels," his voice thundered across the wasteland. "Must we bring you water out of this rock?" The staff swung high and struck the rock, not once but twice. Water gushed forth abundantly, and the people rushed forward to drink, unaware they were witnessing a pivotal moment of tragedy. In that instant of anger, everything changed. By striking the rock instead of speaking to it, by claiming the power as his own rather than God's, Moses had shattered more than just the silence of the desert. He had broken faith with the one who had trusted him to represent his holiness before the people. The divine verdict fell like a hammer. "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." In a single moment, the dream of 40 years evaporated like morning dew in the desert sun. The people drank their fill, oblivious to the cost of their water. But Moses knew. In his tent that night, the weight of the consequence pressed upon him like the stone he had struck. The Promised Land, the goal that had driven him through decades of wandering, would remain forever just beyond his reach. Yet even in this crushing moment, his leadership did not falter. He would continue to guide, to teach, to prepare the next generation, all while knowing he would never cross the Jordan himself. The dawn painted Mount Nebo in shades of gold as Moses began his final ascent. Below, the camp of Israel stretched out like a vast tapestry, the same people he had led from slavery, now poised to enter their promised inheritance without him. Each step up the mountain carried the weight of history. No one accompanied him on this last journey. The man who had walked with God now walked alone, his staff marking his path up the rocky slope. The same legs that had fled Egypt, that had climbed Sinai, now carried him to his final destination. Though 120 years old, he climbed with the strength of youth, his last miracle. At the summit, the air grew still. Before him stretched a panorama that took his breath away. God's voice, familiar as a father's, began to paint with words. "This is the land I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." To the north lay Gilead's forests, to the west the great sea, to the south the Negev desert, and there, just beyond reach, Jericho, the gateway to the Promised Land. Moses stood transfixed, every detail burned into his memory. The Jordan River snaking like a silver thread, the fertile valleys, the palm trees of Jericho. In that moment, he saw not just the present, but visions of Israel's future unfolding before him, cities yet unbuilt, battles yet unfought, a destiny yet unfulfilled. Then came the gentle command, "You have seen it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there." There was no bitterness in Moses' heart, only acceptance and peace. He had run his race, he had kept the faith. Now it was time to rest. What happened next remains one of Scripture's great mysteries. No human eye witnessed Moses' final moments. Some say he died as God spoke to him, others that he fell asleep looking at the Promised Land. All we know is that God himself buried Moses in an unknown valley in Moab, the only person in Scripture to receive such an honor. The people mourned for 30 days, but the mystery of Moses' burial spot remained. No marker was raised, no shrine built. The greatest prophet Israel had ever known vanished like the morning mist, leaving only his legacy and his words behind. Yet this was not the end of Moses' story. A divine struggle would ensue over his body, a battle between heaven's highest archangel and the Prince of Darkness himself. And centuries later, on another mountain, he would appear again, speaking with the one greater than himself about an exodus yet to come. While the people of Israel mourned in the valley below, an extraordinary conflict unfolded on the heights of Mount Nebo. The archangel Michael, heaven's warrior prince, stood guard over Moses' body. The air crackled with tension as another presence approached. Satan himself, the accuser who had watched Moses' every step for 120 years. The confrontation, recorded in the book of Jude, reveals a battle not of swords but of authority. Satan came with his claim, "This man is mine. Did he not kill an Egyptian? Did he not strike the rock in anger? Did he not fail to enter the Promised Land?" Each accusation rang across the mountain like thunder. But Michael, mighty as he was, didn't respond with his own power. His reply was simple yet profound. "The Lord rebuke you." In this moment, a crucial truth was revealed. Even Moses' body rested in God's authority alone, not in his own righteousness or achievements. The drama of this encounter echoed Moses' own life story. Just as he had learned to rely not on his own strength but on God's power, now even in death, his vindication came not through personal merit but through divine authority. The same God who had called him from a burning bush now claimed him in death. This mysterious conflict carries deeper significance. Why would there be such a battle over a dead body? The answer lies in what Moses represented. He was more than a leader. He was the lawgiver, the prophet who had seen God face to face, the man whose life bridged slavery and freedom. His body, like his life, carried profound symbolic weight. The location itself speaks volumes. Mount Nebo, where Moses glimpsed the Promised Land but could not enter, became the stage for this supernatural confrontation. The same spot where human limitation met divine decree now witnessed a clash between heavenly powers. Some scholars suggest that Satan's claim on Moses' body was an attempt to create a shrine, knowing humanity's tendency to worship relics and holy sites. God's decision to hide the burial place suddenly takes on new meaning. not just preventing idolatry, but protecting the truth that Moses' greatness lay not in his remains, but in his relationship with God. The battle's outcome, while not explicitly stated, is clear from history. No shrine was built, no body was found, and Moses' legacy remained pure, pointing not to himself, but to the God he served. In death, as in life, he remained a servant of something greater than himself. Deep within the narrative of Moses' death lie profound truths that echo through the centuries. The first emerges from the waters of Meribah, a lesson about authority that would shake the foundations of religious understanding. Here stood Moses, the man who had delivered countless miracles, yet one moment of claiming God's power as his own, "Must we bring water?" carried devastating consequences. The price of this transgression strikes many as severe, 40 years of leadership ending just short of the goal. Yet in this seeming harshness lies a powerful truth. Those who carry divine authority bear greater responsibility. The higher the calling, the stricter the standard. Moses' punishment wasn't merely about striking a rock. It was about preserving the purity of God's representation before his people. Consider the dramatic symbolism of the rock itself. In the early journey, God had commanded Moses to strike the rock, prefiguring Christ's first coming and crucifixion. But at Meribah, he was to speak to it, pointing toward prayer and direct communication with God. By striking twice, Moses unknowingly distorted this divine picture, suggesting Christ would need to be sacrificed again. The mystery of his hidden grave adds another layer of significance. Throughout history, humans have turned burial sites into shrines, transforming remembrance into worship. By concealing Moses' resting place, God protected both his legacy and his people from the trap of idolatry. The message rings clear. Even the greatest of prophets was but a servant pointing to something greater. Perhaps most striking is the lesson of graceful endings. Moses denied his lifelong dream, responded not with bitter protest, but with increased devotion. His final acts were not of rebellion, but of preparation, blessing the tribes, commissioning Joshua, recording the law. Here was a man who understood that leadership is about the people's destiny, not the leader's desires. The view from Nebo carries its own profound message. Moses saw the promised land, but couldn't enter, a powerful metaphor for the relationship between law and grace. The law, represented by Moses, could show the promise but couldn't deliver it. That would require Joshua, whose name, Yeshua, is the Hebrew form of Jesus, to lead the people into their inheritance. Even Moses' physical condition at death, eyes undimmed, strength unabated, speaks volumes. Unlike natural decline, his end came not from weakness, but from divine timing. Here was a life not slowly extinguished but purposefully concluded, every moment until the last filled with meaning and mission. In the gleaming corporate towers of today's world, echoes of Moses' leadership journey resound with startling relevance. Modern leaders, like Moses atop Mount Nebo, often face the bittersweet reality of building something they may not see completed. CEOs lay foundations for decade-long visions, knowing they might not be there for the final triumph. Scientists initiate research that future generations will complete. Parents plant trees under whose shade they'll never sit. The Meribah incident speaks powerfully to today's pressure points. How many careers have crumbled in a moment of angry response? How many leaders have fallen by claiming personal credit for team achievements? Moses' story reminds us that position and past success offer no immunity from consequence. In fact, they demand higher accountability. Consider the modern parallel of succession planning. Moses' preparation of Joshua offers a masterclass in leadership transition. No clinging to power, no undermining of the successor, no attempt to control from the grave. Instead, we see public endorsement, careful mentoring, and then, most critically, a complete stepping away. In an age where founders struggle to let go of their companies and political leaders resist peaceful transitions, Moses' example shines brightly. The hidden grave carries particular relevance in our age of personality cults and personal branding. In a world obsessed with legacy and monuments, the deliberate obscurity of Moses' resting place challenges our assumptions about remembrance. True legacy, it suggests, lies not in marble monuments, but in lives transformed and wisdom passed down. The battle over Moses' body finds its modern counterpart in the struggles over a leader's legacy. Just as Satan sought to claim Moses' remains, today we see reputations fought over, legacies rewritten, and achievements reinterpreted. The lesson remains. True vindication comes not from human defense, but from divine authority. Perhaps most revolutionary is Moses' response to divine no. In an era where entitlement often trumps acceptance, where never take no for an answer is celebrated wisdom, Moses demonstrates the profound strength in accepting limitation. His graceful submission to God's decree offers a powerful alternative to the modern narrative of endless self-assertion. These ancient sands hold one final lesson for our time: the art of ending well. In a world that often reduces worth to productivity and influence, Moses' story suggests a different measure. His greatest moment wasn't parting the Red Sea, but preparing others to cross the Jordan without him. True greatness, it seems, lies not in holding on, but in knowing when and how to let go. The story of Moses' death thus becomes more than ancient history. It becomes a mirror in which modern leaders, parents, mentors, and all who carry responsibility can examine their own journey. The view from Nebo still beckons, challenging us to consider what mountains we must climb, what promises we must trust, and what legacies we will leave behind. Your thoughts on Moses' remarkable journey matter to us. What aspects of his story resonate most with your own life experiences? Share your reflections in the comments below. If you found value in this exploration of leadership, faith, and human nature, please consider subscribing to our channel. We're dedicated to bringing you more compelling stories that bridge ancient wisdom with modern understanding. Help us spread these timeless lessons by sharing this video with family and friends. Each share helps build our community of thoughtful viewers like yourself. Don't forget to hit the like button if you appreciated this content. Your support enables us to continue creating in-depth historical and spiritual content that both educates and inspires.